Profound Conversations is a listening and dialogue space which brings foremost thought leaders into a conversation to grapple with the vexing challenges of today's world. Welcome to another episode of Profound Conversations.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Profound Conversations. I am Nona Mitchell-Richardson, and I will serve as the conductor for today's conversation about self-care milestones, women who choose healthy food, rest, and wellness practices for life balance. I am really thrilled to be joined by two very dynamic women who know a lot about this topic, whether it's through lived experience, training, and as well as leadership and coaching experience. So I want to introduce the two of you. I am happy to have Miss Joya Jefferson-Nuri, who is an ICF certified executive leadership and public speaking coach. She specializes in helping clients quiet their inner critic chatter that causes self-doubt and limits their professional and personal growth. Welcome, Joya.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And next I have Latifa Muhammad Turner, who is a master Reiki teacher of 13 years and a student and practitioner of alternative health practices that are rooted in global indigenous cultures. She's also an advocate and artist, carrying on a long legacy of social activism and arts in her family. Welcome, Latifa.
Hi, thank you, Nona. Looking forward to the conversation.
I am too. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart as a professional woman, as also a natural health practitioner. And I want to start it off by sort of framing sort of what we're experiencing as women in this society. We exist in a society that supports and really actually rewards hustle culture, grind till you make it, rest, sleep when you die, that kind of culture of high achievement, competition, acquisition, that is made just a bit worse by the fantasies that we see on social media, where people are living these lives of luxury and achievement, and everything looks perfect, and we're sort of just encouraged and supported to actually sacrifice our bodies and our well-being for these things that we're supposed to achieve, that society says we need to achieve. And so I want to put myself in the shoes of the working woman, the single mom, the wife, daughter, and sister who is doing all the things and trying to figure out, like, where is the balance for me? Like, where should I be on the spectrum between hustle and grind and sleep when I die versus taking care of myself? So I want to start with you, Joya. Tell us sort of, what are you experiencing in your coaching practice in terms of how women are coming to you with this challenge?
I first tell my clients, and all of my clients are women, and 99% of them are women of color. I first tell them that this construct of the 80-hour week, work until you drop, sleep when you're dead, was constructed by white men in a aggressive drive to possess, own, and dominate. It's not something we have to take with us into that. And we are learning, as you both know, you're both in naturopathy, we are learning that without sacred rest, a time you hold sacred to rest your body, to rest your heart, to rest your soul, to open your chakras, to rest your mind, you're not going to be the visionary that you want to be. It's not that you're playing hooky from work. It is just that you need this time to recharge everything, including your relationship with some higher power. So I ask my clients not to see it as an add-on, but see it as an appointment in their calendar.
I appreciate that so much. And I know a lot of women who are watching this are saying, this is amazing. I love that idea. Latifa, how are you? What are you sort of experiencing in terms of the women that are coming to you in your practice?
Well, it's interesting. You live long enough, you hear so many different things, and I tend to adopt those things that I hear that make a lot of sense.
and then gain some experience over years to kind of validate how they've worked out for me. And a lot of times, actually, I feel like I'm part of an unfolding journey, not necessarily picking and choosing all of my pathway, but accepting it more or less. And so when people come to me, one of the greater philosophies that I have for sisters in particular is, it's all similar to the birthing process, right? Most women can relate to that. They either have been in some form of a watcher or a person who's experienced that. You can never forget it if you do, right? On any level. Going through the birthing channel, there are phases of development. There's a stage in which you are in your mother's belly and you are experiencing everything, though you are protected in a whole different veil of environment, right? And then there's a phase in which you go out through that tunnel, that canal, and it's the most skull crushing experience, right? Your body never forgets this experience, and it actually makes you equipped for every hard experience that you're ever going to have. That's why a birthing canal is so vitally important, because now you've experienced the biggest trauma and everything else is easy,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And then you come out into this nurturing space where, if under ideal circumstances, you're breastfed, hopefully up to 2 years. And in that space, you get so much connection with other human beings that it gives you a platform where you have emotional balance for the rest of your time frame. Of course, this is all challenged over time, right? But as we look at it as just that, just a challenge, just a test, then you experience it in a way that's almost like a video game. You're like, what's up today? Right? And you jump into it no matter what the adversity is, with the mindset of, I'm going to come out of this in a better position than I came in, closer
Mm-hmm.
to my value and my
Mm-hmm.
purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Okay.
when you couch it in that, it doesn't matter what the experience is. It
Mm-hmm.
becomes, a big brother, may I have another, right? A big sister, may I have another, because you realize the greater challenge, the bigger the footprint of your personality and your journey.
Interesting. So, for women who are sort of in the space of overwhelm, right? And they're hearing you and they're hearing Joya say, you've got to make this sacred space, or you have what it is that you need to, survive and thrive and move forward. But they're like, I have two jobs and I have all these different roles and responsibilities that are overwhelming me. What is a place to start? Like, how do they like go from this crazy space of overwhelm to finding that space that you're talking about? Like, what's the path to that to start?
You have to start to eliminate the noise, right? We all have a very quiet space within us. Every human being is given this. No matter what physical state you are in, you have this quiet space where if you go in there, there's answers to everything in there, right?
Yes, I've
And
experienced.
while you're in this kind of mind womb,
Mm-hmm.
you go in a state almost like a cocoon where you come in, whatever the problems were out there, you come in and you start to synthesize them,
Mm-hmm.
right? I used to take an exercise where whatever my problems were, for like school, for instance, I would go to sleep with the intention of solving those things before I woke up in the
Oh,
morning.
oh, okay.
And lo and behold, whatever the case may be, my concept of where I was the next day was better. You
Wow.
could call it a placebo or you could just call it a new reality and you're bending it. It didn't
Right,
matter. For
right,
me, my outlook was ready to go.
right. Interesting.
And I
Interesting.
don't want to say that in the sense of it just being like, all good. And there are circumstances that bring you to your humbling knees, and you have to take time to unfold into those spaces, accept where you are, and then try to develop a pathway out of those
Right,
spaces.
right.
So I don't by any means want to make it so easy sounding. It is definitely
Right,
not that.
right, right. So, yeah, I know that there are a lot of people who have different paths to that quiet space. You know, as you mentioned, like there are people who pray, people who meditate, people who journal, and I think that you made a really excellent point though about really first acknowledging what it is, like what's real in your moment. Because a lot of us are just going. We're just trying to get from this moment to the next moment, just from this day to the next day. And we're actually not, and we're feeling stressed and we're feeling overwhelmed and we're sometimes unhappy. And sometimes that ends up compounding into other mental health challenges like depression and anxiety and things like that. And we actually feel like we don't have the time to actually stop and say, what is this that I'm experiencing and how am I going to get out of it? And so I think that is the question that I would ask on behalf of the women who are watching this, who are in that space. Like, how do you, what is the actual technical step of acknowledging and looking at what is your reality and how do you get quiet? Do you have some advice for women who want to be where you are, want to understand that real skill set actually to be able to get into that quiet space and let your higher power, your inner spirit, whatever that intuition is, whatever people want to call it, allow it to do its work and allow it to draw from whatever is already within you. How do you suggest that they actually slow it down and start that process?
Well, I feel like, life is fair, and we've
That's interesting.
all inherited some platform, some space that nurtures us. You can call it
Mm-hmm.
family, you can call it community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but life evens itself out. If you're born an orphan, you'll find that you might have more resources than someone who's born with a
Mm-hmm.
full fledged family in many
Right.
regards, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so what ends up happening is I live by certain constitutions and certain frameworks. For
Mm-hmm.
one, and you mentioned earlier in how you shared my background, I look at cultural practices before me. I look at
Mm-hmm.
religious practices before me and say, what did they do right? What did they know? Because
Mm-hmm.
I don't like starting over from scratch. I like to build off the heels of another. My motto is the second mouse gets the cheese.
That is, oh, that's right.
Right?
That's
I don't need to be
absolutely
first.
right.
I'm like,
All
ow.
right.
When people go first, I'm like, oh, looks good, but
That was
I'd rather
painful.
skip the pothole.
Right, right, right.
Now, that doesn't mean anything. Oftentimes words don't teach. You have to experience things
Right.
in order for you to really understand them and grasp them. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, women who really get into new spaces are kind of rebellious. So you're going to
Mm-hmm.
trip a little bit more than most people anyway in that space. And then you have all of these ceilings up, down, to the sides
Mm-hmm.
that you also have to deal with and grapple with as a landscape, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I talk about cultural practices, oftentimes routine is everything, right?
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
routine will restart the clock no
Mm-hmm.
matter what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
So as a Muslim, I have 5 prayers a day.
Mm-hmm.
It's you live by it.
Mm-hmm.
And having that prostration 17 times in the course of a day changes the scope of your outlook, right? It's
Mm.
hard to look at the floor and be egotistical.
Ah,
It's just a humbling space, right?
yeah.
And so, you know, by doing that, by having just one routine, and you don't have to have a myriad of things, just pick something
Mm-hmm.
that you can do consistently. Sometimes they talk about people who have poor diets, but they have the same food every day and they
Yeah.
live long lives, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
God likes consistency,
Okay.
right? And
Yeah.
so I think you need to look in your own cultural background and say, what was my grandmother doing? What was my parents doing? What do my
Mm-hmm.
aunts and cousins do? And
Mm-hmm.
figure out if those things fit within your concept or expand out to your,
Mm-hmm.
the world is expansive. Expand out to your networks and see what other people are doing that jive with you and take a sampler.
You have to take that sacred space. That's the solution. That's how you get there. Where do I start? Like, how is there a way to do it incrementally, or like how do you suggest they start?
It comes from a place of your inner critic. Every one of
Mm-hmm.
us, something happened in our youth, generally between the ages of 7 and 14, but generally between 7 and 12. something happened that shook you to your core. Some adult said something to you where you started to doubt yourself. You started to doubt your ability. And it's the inner critic, that small voice that most of us don't know is even talking, that tells us what we can't do. And it keeps us on that treadmill. And it keeps us on that hamster wheel, even worse than a treadmill, that keeps us going because there's a voice that says, you're not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough, you're not enough, you haven't done enough. I teach my clients a mantra: I am enough, I have enough, I do enough. And from that space of knowing from conception you are worthy, no one, no job can give you your worth. No education can give you your worth. From that sperm hit that egg, you are worthy. And from understanding your place of worthiness in the world, you can now operate a lot more calm because you don't have to be a human doer. You can become a human being and you can just be. And a lot of the things we strive for are on that thing you actually don't want. You just told you want it. Okay, you have to drive this level of car in order to be worthy to be in this group. I have to wear this designer outfit in order to be worthy in this group. When you come to recognize and understand your worthiness simply because you were granted the ability to be a human, then you can relax.
Mhm.
And from that is to hear
Right.
when your inner critic is talking. And you know when she's talking, when you don't feel good, when you don't feel empowered, when you don't feel strong, when you feel stressed, she is yammering in your head, giving you the list of reasons why you're not worthy to get this job. They're going to fire you anyway. This will never work. You can't have that. So it's understanding when your inner critic is talking and understanding how to quiet her. And then you can step off the treadmill because you're not trying to keep up with the Joneses. You are the Joneses.
That's right. So what would you say is like sort of like a person who is like she's on that treadmill, she hears what you're saying, what's her first step? Like what would you suggest to her as her first step?
Stop and listen to her body. If her body is tense, if her shoulders are tense, and then hear the voices, write them down. She says you're not worthy to do this. I'm not worthy to do this. I'm not tall enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not skinny enough. Whatever the inner critic is telling you, write it down and then ask the inner critic, is that true? And
Hmm.
the answer will come back
Yeah.
no. But let's say the answer comes back, yeah, it's true here, it's true there. Then the next question is that the only truth? Question the voice. Question and challenge it because it is only a child. It stayed where that damage happened. I know where mine happened. I was 10 years old. And it stays with me.
Hmm.
But I know when she's talking. Like, oh, wait, wait,
Hmm.
wait, wait, wait. Get a
Right.
either love her into stop talking or get a baseball bat. Either way, you have to stop her from talking because she is determining your future and she's a wounded 10-year-old. So you have
I
to
definitely
know.
agree with this idea of reframing
Mm-hmm.
that you're talking about, and that you have to control the narrative in your head, right? And know that the whisper that's in your ears is sometimes detrimental to your well being. Um, but I also think that sometimes it takes hardcore interventions.
Yeah,
Hmm.
like her coach.
Like I like a coach and like a naturopath, a healer,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
So, I mean, I have done healing work to countless people, right, over the span of the last 13 years of being Reiki master, probably 2 years before that, as I was developing into the space. But with all the skills, abilities, and amazing things that I've witnessed and participated in, at some point, I had to go to another interventionist to help me.
Hmm.
And he didn't tell me psychologically what to do. He
Mhm.
laid me down and
Wow.
he did a synopsis of where my spiritual state was
Hmm.
and said, aha, there's something latched on to your energy that we need to
Mm.
get rid of before we can have a conversation,
Wow.
right? And what I realized was I did something like Chinese medicine, right? Chinese energy medicine. What I realized was when he started pulling whatever force was, it was like holding on to dear life. I started like coughing and all kinds of stuff happening up in there. And once it was over, and it only lasted moments, once it was over, I noticed that that voice was killed.
Oh,
It was
wow.
gone. So it had taken on its own life. It didn't need me to feed it any more Cheerios. It
Mhm.
was fully muscular. It had grown up over the years and it had hardcore teeth into my psyche. And I had to break it up in order to then take a breath and then start the journey to talking to my own self the way I knew I deserved to be talked to.
Mhm.
And it is an up and down thing. You could start along that path and you trip. So it's no perfect world, and there's many levels of intervention. The concept that one of the concepts I live for is be and it is. It's a concept of God. When
Mhm.
God says be, it is. And when
Mhm.
you think about that, you have all of these forces coming to you at the same time from different spaces. You have Joya talking in your ear and teaching you the right language to reprogram. You have the Qigong Chinese medicine guy pulling stuff out of you. You have the images of other things coming into your forefront of your space. So just be open to what those things are, and you'll
Mhm.
see that you're unfolding into your best natural self.
Mm.
But it does
Wow.
take intervention by yourself and with others.
Yeah, I totally feel that. And I know that there's a big movement now, thankfully, for this whole expression of like doing the work, like doing your own work. And people think of that in the frame of mental health therapy. They think about it in ayahuasca. They think about it in a lot of the indigenous healing methods that you spoke of, as well as coaching. And I think that's probably a really great advancement in our society that can help to counteract.
Absolutely. Which
You
of the
know,
favors will you deny, right?
right,
Why
right,
would you not take advantage of all of the fruit that's
right,
low hanging to be able to
right,
help you both through technology and through
right.
tradition?
Exactly. And we have so many challenges like the pandemic, for example, which created a whole set of crises for some people, for many people, and including people dealing with the death of loved ones and dealing with isolation and that kind of thing. But it also brought forth some other things, like having access to more technology and more knowledge and that exists in the world, and people getting more information about alternative ways of being.
So
Yeah.
technology is both our friend and our enemy.
Yes.
I say that, and I mean, you probably have a multiple things that popped up in your head to define what I just said, right? So I'm
Yeah.
preaching to the choir, right? But I mean that it'll teach you better ways to harvest things, to grow
Hmm.
things. But then you have these intervention states that takes it out of its natural order, right? So we might
Hmm.
have more food for people, but then the quality of that food or the
Right.
access to that food is out of
Right.
range, right?
Right.
Or
Right.
that you don't have the regulatory agencies in place, and what they tell you is just by their word and not by your own ability to recheck what they're saying, right? So you have technology that has actually made life a little bit more complicated through processes. And then at the same time, technology helps us kind of dig through things in a way that we had no knowledge before and would take us eons to figure out we can do in
Exactly.
seconds.
Yeah. And
So
there's
you have to figure out how to balance that.
Yeah. And I think that I mean, with like social media, for example, which some people think of as the devil, but you see the things on social media that are completely not beneficial to our society in terms of the sort of the images and the messaging that we're seeing, and the attention seeking, and the ways that people are rewarded for bad behavior sometimes. But then you also see there's been a surgence of positive messaging, of people teaching, of people coaching, on social media, of people offering alternative ways of thinking and looking at things that has actually benefited a lot of people. And I've seen that myself. You look at the Tabitha Browns, who has become a sensation in the Black community for just being positive and being supportive of people living a healthier lifestyle and being normal, as opposed to these ideals of that aren't really real, the filtered parts of social media. And so I guess I'm thinking about I'm putting myself in the shoes of the women who are watching this and wondering how they can sort of use some of these things that they're already doing, like being on social media. Maybe there's a way of managing that actually can be beneficial. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a really good example of all of this, like Jetson's life, right? Through COVID 19's emergence, right? To me, COVID was both the worst and the best thing I've ever experienced. I mean, I was always against what was mentioned earlier as the 80-hour work week. It was not human. It put things over humanity. But now you have an option to work from home most of the time, right? Or half the time, or some period of time that you never had in your whole portfolio over your lifetime of a career. Right? You finally get to know your family and your children and be nurturers for them. And you get to have an environment where you win back your time, because I can talk to you from whatever state you're in, which I'm not even sure, right? And then I can go right back to the event that I came out of and still be part of that community.
Yeah.
So it gives you a fluidity of life that gives you peace of mind, because now I'm not putting my priorities on the back burner.
Right.
Which is inclusive of my family.
Yeah, it's so interesting though, because I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and I was saying that I was so here's the other side of that. I was so mentally exhausted because I had 4 Zoom meetings before 12 o'clock. And I was using all of my mental energy on 4 different topics. And before the pandemic, I would have had to go to those in person, and I would have not scheduled 4 meetings before 12 o'clock. I would have had 1 meeting before 12 and 1 after 12. And I would have had some space in between to collect myself and get my thoughts together. And then you have the other side of like working from home, which I do now. And before the pandemic, I had an office, and so I had more interaction with people. But I also sometimes find myself stretching into the evening because I don't have that delineation. I have an office in my house, but I can just run and grab something to eat and come right back,
Yeah, and I think you have to be in charge of your time.
Yeah.
You have to make yourself the ambassador of your best health.
Yes.
Right? Which includes your peace of mind. Just because there are 5 or 4 meetings in a day doesn't mean you have to go to them. I learned along the way from an older woman who started the first International Museum of Muslim Cultures, and she was all over. It was just a big thing. And I said, okay, I want to go to this event. She said, well, Latifa, I only go to 2 events a day. So we got to pick which ones we're going to go to. And I don't think I'm going to go to that one today, And so although now we're online, you can still have the same constitution of thought. I can't make that. I have a conflict.
Right.
And that conflict is your own personal policy.
Exactly. Your own time, your own appointment, as Joya was saying, your own appointment and with yourself. And I think that's something that we're going to have to recalibrate, I think, because we sort of got into the before pandemic mode, and now we got into the pandemic mode, and now this is the so-called post-pandemic mode, that we have to do a new calibration of like what our space and time actually looks like. And
on the flip side of that, we have to think generationally, right? So I'm leveraging technology in a very strategic way that every day I speak to my daughters. Right? Where one's away in Costa Rica doing a study abroad, the other's in Atlanta, and one's in Boston. But every day I take a moment, and they know they're going to hear from me. And it's not just even going to just be, how are you doing? It's like, how is your business model going today? And so I become a coach to them, and they become a coach to me, and we blend in one state. And I think of them as one synaptic. And I build out from that community abroad, even outside of family ties,
to extended family within the community, those who share my same belief systems and we're working towards the same end. Even those who are a little bit different who anchor me through negative state. I think you can't be in a team of holistic benefit if there's not one negative person in the group, but that person still has to be open to
Right.
progress. I'm not saying someone who's going to anchor you and kill you. I'm saying someone who's going to anchor you, but move a little bit with the waves and the water so that it grounds you. And there's a very big difference to that.
That sounds like work. It sounds like like a person that is bringing you the negative energy is like also dragging a little bit, dragging
It
the
is work, and life is work.
Yeah.
And that's fine, right? Because that's the only way you're going to get to power is you're going to have to do some work, right? We're made for work.
Absolutely.
We didn't come here just to like go to the
Absolutely.
beach all the time.
Well, that's
but it is important to go to the beach.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Topic because there's now this movement. I don't know if you've heard about it, but now there's this whole movement, especially among Black women and Black women who have been in corporate and entrepreneurial spaces. This whole soft life movement, where there are women who are saying, you know what, we have done all the labor, and we are over the idea of our value being placed on our labor. And now we're figuring out through technology, through whatever other ways we can figure it out, how to work the least amount possible and have the most leisure possible.
That sounds like efficiency to me.
Efficiency. Okay.
Yeah, and I love that model. It is not a new adoption. I never heard of that coined phrase per se, but that is how I live. You know,
Okay. Awesome.
I try to work hard, but I play harder.
Nice.
And it all gets mixed and blended up, you know, and that's how you get the best out of me. Other than that, I'm not showing up to be the best person that you want on your team. So you have to have that fluidity. So during COVID, I traveled to 17 states. Why? I needed some air to breathe.
Right.
I don't know about this lockdown thing. Y'all can do that if you want to, but I don't need someone to validate my experiences and tell me exactly what to do.
Right. That's so interesting. The soft life, you're saying it's doable, you're doing it. What do you suggest to women who aspire to that, but they're also thinking about, you know, people are telling me I need to build generational wealth and I need to, you know, work hard and you know, build and save and prepare and set up the future generations with, you know, financial stability. Do you think it's possible to do both?
I certainly think so. I actually got the idea of having a soft space. Well, my mother set the tone, first of all. She came home when I was in the third grade and said, I'm never working for anyone again, which meant she was going to have freedom of choice and we weren't going to eat a whole lot.
Uh-oh.
You know, and that's okay because we learned what was important at that point and what wasn't. And that testimony that she gave us rooted us in our own womanhood, right? And our own validation and us accepting things and not accepting things.
Right.
So I do believe that you have to be true to your nature, right? I don't swim across. I don't swim against the current. I think of it as a riptide. You can't swim into it. You have to swim sideways. And God has given you all these cool tools that we don't need to erase. One of my husbands said to me, and I've been married a couple of times. He said, "The woman is the softest place in the world, right?" And I said, "You know what? That's a good thing, right? I want to be the softest place in the world." And so how do I create a space where it's so nurturing that you never want to leave? You can't wait to get back to. That's for my children, my family, and my community. And at the same time, I'm advancing, right? I'm not staying still. And that's, again, the benefit of the technology. You don't have to sacrifice too much to do this. You have to figure out where your balance is. Like, I might feel comfortable doing 50 hours a week, where you might only need 20 hours a week. It depends on the stage of development of my children
Right.
right? I just
Absolutely.
became an empty nester and I'm living life
I know that's right.
like it was never lived before. Because when I was 20, I didn't have the money or the resource to do the
Right.
things that I'm doing now, or the
Right.
experience or the wisdom.
Experience. There you
So
go.
I'm loving having
Right.
all of these new tools and some, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
so you have to figure out, do you want to be like the example of a man in woman form? No, I don't think that that's an advantage for us.
Right.
Our
Right.
unfair advantage is unfolding into our natural best skills, right? I had a guy who I was working with at my job, and he said, Latifah, when you talk to the guy, he always gives you what you want, but when I talk to him, he doesn't. Right? And he was trying to put it in title and
Right.
authority,
Right.
and that's, I said, no. Before I got the position, when I came to him, I came in a softer, sweeter, kinder voice with the concept that was already done in my head, right? And I projected that into the sphere of communication. So that was my advantage. Now, if he came sweet, he might not win that battle. He needs to
You're
come
right.
like, yo, what's up? You know?
Right.
But I'm
Exactly.
coming like, hey. And that doesn't mean I don't have a firm stop when I need to.
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
that doesn't mean I play into stereotypes, right? What it means is I like to analyze, and that's place where it's really quiet. I like to analyze, what are my strengths? And I want to
Absolutely.
lean on those strengths
Right.
so that I can build paths in that lane better than anybody else in that space. Knowing that it doesn't have to be this idea of I win, you win, you
Right.
lose.
Right.
I
Right.
want everybody to win in that space
Mhm.
as a nurturer.
Right.
And that may mean sometimes I take a back seat to your glory, and I'm a supporter. One of the best stories I have in framing my own journey is the V formation of the birds, right? You see them coming south and all
Right.
this. When they go into that formation, there's always one leader at that point, and the birds right behind them are riding the wind off of that, and then the birds behind them are all riding the wind off of that. So it's all easier for all the birds in the V formation,
Right.
except for that leader.
Ah,
When the bird drops back, another bird takes that place.
right.
If the birds get sick, two birds drop out of formation, go to where the sick bird is, nurse it back to health, or nurse it until it dies. There is a unique justice in working hard that we all have to subscribe to and stay in the space that works communally. Because as a woman, you grow to be a mother, even if you're not a biological mother, you grow to be a mother in community.
Mhm.
And that means you're constantly putting other people's interests in place to grow them beyond where you were, because we're progressing, right? And being ready for new challenges, and also being able to take your breaths and your surrendering. So you can catch me in Sedona sometimes,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yeah.
Doing business and not doing business.
Right.
Or you can catch me on a ship out to the ocean for 10 days, being part of the crew.
Mm-hmm.
You inherit the landscape you have, and you work it
Mm-hmm.
the best way you
Right.
can.
Right.
And I think that's just what I subscribe to people. You don't have to follow my journey. Figure out what resonates with you and become the best in that space, and give yourselves breaks all throughout.
Right. So what are you, I'm hearing a lot of self-care happening in between and around the work that you're doing, and just sort of being in a flow, right? And so I guess for women who are constantly driving and pushing hard, do you have some advice for them about how to, like, what forms that self-care could take, like some examples of like how they can take care of themselves?
Well,
And
food for one, right?
Mhm.
I have constantly had a battle with food because I have to figure out which constitution I'm subscribing to, right? At first, I thought it was just not processed food. But then I realized that the palate that I inherited as a derivative of a slave without whatever I got from my indigenous motherland doesn't work well with my system all the time. For instance, if I drink milk or cheese, which makes everything taste better,
butter, right?
I literally can create a paste in my brain that makes me depressed.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So you have to figure out what works for your system. And oftentimes, where we come from, those spaces came with certain foods that really match how we live. And when we're in new spaces, we have to kind of like, when in Rome, do as Romans do.
do things seasonally, do things that grow in the spaces close to you. If you come into a new area and you're traveling and the water doesn't fit well with you, if you eat an onion grown in that space, it changes your dynamic to be able to digest that water.
Yeah, yeah,
So you have to
absolutely.
know the clues along the way that
Right,
helps you come in sync with your environment.
right, absolutely. Yeah, wow. And I know that there are, for us, especially African American people, so much of our identity and our what we are internalize as nurturing comes from unhealthy foods. Sweet potatoes, candy yams taste delicious.
Yeah,
Macaroni
I
and
mean,
cheese
yeah,
is delicious, and they're
yams are actually good for you.
right, but not candy yams with a
Right.
not
What we put on it
right,
changes it,
right,
right?
right, right. A regular baked sweet potato, delicious. Roasted sweet potato, fantastic. But when we have Thanksgiving at my mother's house, that is the one time a year that I'm going to have candy yams. I'm going to have macaroni and cheese. I'm going to have, the things that would be ordinarily healthy sometimes, but they're not done in a healthy way. But I think that what we have to work with within ourselves is this idea that our identity is tied to things that are not good for us. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I got some advice from another woman who was the mother of a different husband.
Okay.
And I tended to marry men 20 years my senior, so these women were 40 years my
Right,
senior. So
right, right.
I'm inheriting this rich library of love,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And she said to me, because I was bright eyed, bushy tailed, and idealistic, she said, if you're going to change the bull, you grab it by the horns real slow, and then you slowly change it. And when I looked at Miss Lewis, I was like, what? What does that mean?
Right,
Right? And it took me a few years, but I got it. You
right, right,
cannot instantly change something. Zig
right,
Ziglar said, when you take something away, you got to put it back. You have to
right.
put a
Something
substitution
else. Right,
back
right,
in place.
right,
And so, what are you putting in place? Okay, you have those candy yams. Maybe you could share a different recipe with that great aunt, or you could ask if you could respectfully bring additional
right,
items,
right, right,
right?
right,
But the whole movement is moving towards consciousness
right.
because, believe
Absolutely.
it or not, by not doing that, you are inheriting the slave master's food still.
Exactly,
And you
exactly.
have the same chains
Yeah.
still on you, physically,
Mhm.
mentally, and spiritually.
Yeah, absolutely. And we so in my family, one of the things that we have some of our members of the family who are a little bit healthier and some who are still tied to that Virginia ham. And so what I've tried to do as one of the elders in my sort of peer group is try to create other traditions that we can identify with that doesn't have to be tied to food. So then we can start to slowly move away from food as the thing that defines that food is the thing that defines who we are as a family, as a people, as a tribe, and then sort of enable us to actually carry on that family in a healthier way so that we can do other things. We can travel together. We can take road trips together. We can, do certain other things that become our tradition instead of the food part.
Absolutely. It's so, so very important. And once you change your mental dial on what you're trying to do, it becomes like second nature that you're going to start to make those kinds of adjustments and feel really good about them. And when you
Absolutely.
default on them, you will
Right.
find that you'll default a little higher than you defaulted the last time if you have
Right.
strong intentionality and you start to create
Right.
an exercise and routine in that space. But again, you can't do it instantaneously. And culture is very important as a thread to hold us together. So you can't violate the culture. I made the mistake of doing that once when I invited family over to my first lone apartment. And I didn't tell them in advance that for Thanksgiving we were going to have a vegetarian meal. And they literally, once they got there, jumped in the car and drove from Virginia to Maryland 3 hours more than the 12 hours it took them to get from
Oh my
Boston.
gosh.
And I realized I did something wrong by not
Right.
giving them the choice of their
Right.
tradition.
Right.
So that is again what we talk about a riptide. You can't go against that, right? But
Right.
you can start to supplement it in ways that they'll appreciate even more, still keeping the values that you've been
Right.
installed with, and then
Hmm.
furthering them into a new space so that generationally
Talk about generational wealth. What about
Right.
generational health?
Health. Right. Exactly. Well, I think this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you, Latifa, for just sharing all of your wisdom and your experience. We lost Joya a little while ago. She had technical difficulty, but I appreciate what we did get from her in terms of her wisdom and her genius as a executive leadership coach. Do you have a way that people can reach you if they want to learn more about what you offer?
Sure. You can go to 313wonproductions.com and look up any of the work that we're doing now, and then just ask for an appointment if you want to talk one on one about where you want to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for watching or listening. If you're listening to this on a podcast, this has been another episode of Profound Conversations. I appreciate you listening and have a great day.